everybody. This is the second episode of the Ogden Farmers Library's Time Capsule. I am Patrick Montanaro. I am the library assistant here at the Ogden Farmers Library, and I'm joined with
Caitlin Crilly. I'm the Teen Services and Genealogy Librarian at the Ogden Farmers Library.
And we are interviewing today
Jay Diedreck. Lived in Spencerport for a number of years, collectively probably about 30 years. I was actually born in Rochester and then moved to Spencerport area. Went to the Spencerport High School, of course went away to college, then came back and lived in Spencerport for another 10 years. And then went to Chili, and then now I'm back at Hickory Hollow area, or in Hickory Hollow, for now it's been 10 years.
So you have a lot of experience with the area then.
Yes, well, I would think some interesting things, and I'm hoping it would be interesting as I bring them out. My occupation, I'm retired. I was a health inspector for the Monroe County Health Department for 30 years. And a number of other things, a carpenter, woodworker. I worked in a laboratory for 8 to 10 years. So, kind of a varied amount of things that I've done.
Well, I think you're missing the big one, which is what I know you from. And correct me if I'm wrong, but you're a very busy writer, aren't you?
I would say that that's a good description. Since I retired, I thought about writing and how that would open up something entirely new, because with the health department I had to do reports that ended up being 15, 20, 30 pages long, and they had to do with injuries, illnesses, accidents, sicknesses, and they had to stand up in a court of law. So they had to be just precise and perfect. Well, now I could write anything I wanted, and with fiction and with emotion and with relationships and with love and struggles and everything. And it was just like, oh, this is fantastic. So after the first one, it was like, okay, I'm not going to do any more. No, wait a minute. I got another idea. And I locked myself into a room. And I know where my characters have to go with an outline, where they are presently and where they have to go. And then I kind of just do like a daydreaming. And I let my subconscious come a little bit more evident than it normally is while you're awake. And your subconscious is what develops those fantastic dreams that you know, in color and vivid, and you almost think you really lived them as soon as you wake up. Well, I'm using my subconscious, and I can see the scenes happening in front of me, and it's just a matter of trying to get it down fast enough. Writer's block, I never had that.
Oh, that's great.
And I'm on to my fourth book.
That's excellent.
Wow.
Well, it sounds like a very liberating experience, yeah. and I'd love to plug your books right now, and I wonder if you could tell us what the 3 current books you have published right now, and what are your plans for the 4th book?
Sure. Clem Watercress, The Lighthouse Keeper, is my first novel, and it has an awful lot of influence, or Spencerport's got an awful lot of influence in that book. The setting of all my books are somewhere in the coast of Maine, in some little village, and so I just transported a lot of the experiences and the flavor and the culture of Spencerport into this little fictitious village in Maine. I'll mention in my little dialogue or monologue that my books are available worldwide and have been purchased in other countries. So Spencerport's had given the influence for worldwide. For my first book. Seaside Journeys of Faith, again in the same little fictitious village of Port James in Maine, and it deals with the struggles and the triumphs and everything in between. A lot of humor, some adventure. And then Port James Romance, I thought I would try that. I asked one of my coworkers, who's strapping male, big guy, and he read A Poor James Romance and said, "I never thought I would like to read a romance, but it was fantastic." I've had people say, I have a couple people have said, "I have a complaint, just one complaint about your books. It's kept me up too late. I couldn't put them down."
Well, that's a complaint.
It was 3 o'clock in the morning before I finished it. And then I Hear My Lighthouse Calling is my fourth book, which is being back and forth with my publisher, Christian Faith Publishing. And we're getting into the page design at this point. So that should be out in about, maybe 5 months, maybe 4 months.
Well, you have quite a few dedicated readers here at our library, so I know that they'll be looking forward to that.
I was pleased to see, while I was tracking, that Poor James Romance has been taken out 88 times.
That's excellent.
Wow.
Seaside Journeys of Faith about 30 plus times, and Poor James Romance about the same.
That's excellent. Very nice. Well, in the spirit of the literary spirit, you've written something today about your experiences with the Ogden Spencerport area. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Well, we'd love to hear it.
Okay. I'm glad you asked. Just as a start, I'd like to thank you both for the opportunity. And Ogden Farmers Library is just a fantastic library that has helped me promote my books through the display cases and whatnot. So I'm really thrilled to be here. So I titled this May 20th, 2021 Time Capsule. I start out with Spencerport history as told to me by some of my neighbors. Interesting to note that the original firehouse, which is on the corner of Union Street and West Avenue, still has a tower that looks like a chimney. Years ago, the same location, the firehouse used this chimney to dry out their wet fire hoses. They had hooks that went high up into the tower, and then they hung them down to dry. Well, one day, a number of people I'm sure know, when this firehouse actually had a fire inside the building, the fire burned out the wires that supplied the electricity to the fire siren.
Oh, no.
When the siren was working properly, it would be activated when there was a fire in the community. The loud siren could be heard all over the village, and when the firemen heard it from their houses, they knew to report to the firehouse. Since in this case the siren wasn't working, the fire chief jumped into his car and drove to each fireman's house and beeped his horn until the firemen would come out of their own house.
Oh, man.
I was told by an older friend of mine that in the Spencerport village, that even up to the early 1950s, many residents in the village owned chickens, had a cow or two, and houses that had outhouses in their backyards. I titled this section, My Own Spencerport School Memories. The dates on this are 1956 to 1969. And the first topic is the school bus. And that's 1955 to 1965. The 15 kids from our neighborhood waited at the top of the street in all kinds of weather for the school bus. If any child was late, they had to run at full speed to the top of the street to get the bus. That's just the way it was, and we did not complain. Well, not too much at least. Mm-hmm. Our bus driver was named Mr. Putney. We would say Mr. Putney's bus goes putt-putt. His bus, which we call our bus, was bus number 9, and it was a Mack truck school bus. Like a truck, these old buses had the engine under the front hood. Well, one cold, snowy, sub-freezing winter of 20 degrees, we waited for over an hour for the bus to arrive. The wind was blowing, the snow sideways at 30 miles an hour. See, that year, the school purchased a fleet of new school buses that had the engine in the back. The front of the bus was flat. These newer variety of school buses were having trouble starting in the cold weather. So, for some reason, before picking up us kids, our bus, and putting this in quotes, old number 9, was first sent to complete a bus run for the other kids. Again, us kids did not complain, probably because we were all too cold to talk. Many of our school bus drivers were farmers who could arrange their schedules so they could drive and also tend to their farm duties. I need to note here that the following account did not include Mr. Putney. With that said, other school bus drivers made sure we all behaved on the bus. If there was a problem with bus behavior, the bus driver would pull the bus over on the shoulder of the road. He would put it into park and slowly walk down the center aisle while looking at each of us. Finding the culprit, he would pull the kid up vertically by his shirt collars right out of his seat, shake him a few times, and then slam him back down again into his seat. We all behaved rather well after that. Real unruly kids were actually kicked off the bus and had to walk home no matter how far their house was located.
Wow.
This section is called the Trowbridge School Building, and I was there from my 6th grade to 8th grade, junior high, 1963 to 1964. The Trowbridge Apartments on Lyle was built in 1926 and was the Spencerport School Building for kindergarten through high school. In the 1980s, it was decommissioned as a school building. When I was there, it was for 6th grade for me, and then 7th and 8th grades. Well, the ceilings were so high that the teachers had to strain their voices so they could be heard all the way to the back of the classrooms. The auditorium was on the first floor and partly below grade. It's kind of interesting architecture if you think about it in structure. The original gym was also on that floor. The second floor was all classrooms, and the third floor, get this, of all things, also had the cafeteria. All the food had to be put on a dumbwaiter to get to the third floor, or the food service workers had to walk up 3 flights of stairs with the food compartments in their hands. A nice hot and balanced lunch from the cafeteria was 25 cents. And those children whose parents could not afford that usually could at least afford 2 cents for milk. For each staircase, there were great wooden stair banisters going from the 3rd floor right down to the 1st. If not caught by school staff, some brave and athletic kids would slide down the banisters. If they were caught by a teacher, they had to walk back up the stairs in total shame and embarrassment. From my class window, I remember watching airplanes flying in the air, cars and trucks on the road, barges going past on the canal, and trains racing along the railroad tracks. So many of these were commercial, delivering goods to many places. Well, one afternoon, from my school desk and seat, I watched a steam engine racing by and puffing black smoke. To this day, I never knew what that was all about. One very hot and humid day in June, I remember so vividly when workers were there on the roof, just outside our classroom windows. They were spreading hot, smelly tar from buckets to seal and cover the flat roof. With the classroom windows open, most of us felt overcome from the hot fumes. Oh, I remember a few students were sent to the nurse's office, feeling sick to their stomachs. But at the end of the school day, everybody was fine. I also remember air raid drills. We had to evacuate our classroom and in single file go into the hallway, away from any windows. We sat on the floor, put our heads down, and our hands clasped over our necks. And we were not to talk. The teachers would walk up and down the hallways to make sure we were doing as instructed. We figured that having our hands over our bent neck would protect our bodies from any falling debris. Now we're going to go into my high school years, 1965 to 1969. High school principal, Mr. Dwayne Tucker, had a strange and kind of faraway look as he walked down the corridors. He also had the oddest gait as he walked. Well, one day, however, he had to fill in for an hour when our teacher was coming late to school. He mesmerized our class by presenting a fantastic mathematical puzzle. We all could not believe how magical his presentation was. We all loved him after that. Mr. Stanley Robarts was the high school concert band and wind ensemble director. He directed us like a military camp, and for our concerts, get this, envision this before your eyes, he dressed in a formal black tuxedo with tails. In my senior year, our band recorded a 33 1/3 RPM vinyl record for our last concert. We also played a world premiere performance of a work that was written by a well-known composer. See, he heard us play one day and was so impressed by our group that he wrote this piece of music just for our band. Well, Mr. Robarts, however, hated to march in a parade. But for Memorial Day, he got all of the band members together. Over several Saturdays, we practiced marching in step in the high school parking lot. On that Memorial Day that we were practicing for, we marched from the high school down Lyle to Union, south on Union to the cemetery on the left. Our uniforms were blue and gold. Hats were cylinders in shape with a visor. The hats looked like marble. They had a white ostrich feather plume coming up from the top of the flat hat. Our blue jackets were tight-fitting with gold epaulets on the top of our shoulders with gold buttons. Also going around one shoulder, that is looping around, were gold ropes. The front of the jacket also had a design made with braided gold rope. This design was in the form of a handheld xylophone. At the point where the jacket met the blue pants was a V-shaped cut on either side. The blue pants had a gold stripe going down the outside of each leg. They were fancy. We were proud to wear them. And I have an illustration of what they look like.
Oh, wow.
Every single band member had these.
Oh, they are fancy.
That's fantastic.
35 years after graduating from high school, I bought a used French horn. As a child, my parents couldn't afford to buy one. For 13 years, I played in the volunteer Kodak concert band that performed 20 concerts each year at various senior living centers. This is a beautiful testament to the great musical training I received in high school. Also, being in chorus with Mrs. Yankovic led me to singing in church choir for 30 years. For one particular segment in our art class, our art teacher introduced us to pop art. I got a 5-foot-high, 55-gallon cardboard drum from where my dad worked and brought it to class. I painted it just like a Genesee beer can. Now that was white with a red oval in 3/4 of the way up with the words Genesee on it. Well, I got an A, but never got to take it home. Some fellow male students that were just walking down the hallway took one look at it when it was done and grabbed it, taking it away. They were able to open the hatch to the school roof, and they proudly displayed it on the roof so everyone driving by saw it. Until the principal found out about it. Many of the styles and techniques that I learned in art class I used to illustrate all of my 4 novels, and I have at least 50 illustrations in total. I can still remember lots of physics that I learned from Mr. Zorn, as well as chemistry by Mr. Reber, and of course I learned a lot from my math teachers. When taking these same subjects in college, it served as a great base of knowledge that helped me to do well in my college years. In fact, the first 2 years of college was easy because of what I learned in Spencerport. Mr. Sam Spagnola was my biology teacher. It may be interesting to know that his wife, Lori, was a substitute school teacher, which I had from time to time. Presently, she is now my neighbor. So I kiddingly say that I still have to behave myself since she is still watching me. Of course, my high school English teacher helped me in writing. My typing teacher, Mrs. Spears, gave me a priceless keyboard abilities that I have used at the Monroe County Health Department and for my 4 novels. I learned keyboard very well because I was totally enthralled by Mrs. Spears' beautiful looks. I wonder what she looks like today. Oh, probably still wonderful. This next segment is called My Earlier Spencerport Village Memories. In 1965 or so, when I was about 14 years old, I would ride my bicycle into town to get a haircut that cost about 75 cents. The barber shop was located on the west side of Union Street. In the back room, they taught tap dancing. It was typically quiet in the barber shop, with only a light conversation and the sound of hair clippers performing their tasks. However, and this is a huge however, when the tap dancing class started, it was in the back room of the shop. Well, hide your ears. It was so loud that you could not hear yourself think because of all the tap dancing noise on the wooden floors. It sounded like a diesel locomotive running through the shop. I almost fell off my barbershop chair. 1965, I also remember a drugstore on Union Street and also the ice cream factory called Matthew's Ice Cream. Again, in and around 1965, when I was 14 years old, my friend Wayne Wilson and I rode our bikes there and had ice cream. We thought we were pretty cool. Western Auto, again in 65, was owned by Earl Gray, who also owned a gas station and radio repair shop. Places back then had tube testers to find out which tube was not working right. Okay, so this is how it worked. You would open the back of your radio or television set, pull the tubes, and take them to the store. Plugging in each tube and turning on the tube tester, it would show if the tube would have to be replaced. Well, Earl talked about area Spencerport boys playing chicken with their bikes. Hearing the bell, when the lift bridge in town was going up, the boys would race to the bridge. A few minutes later, as the bridge was lowering back down onto the pavement, these doggone boys would place their front bicycle wheels right in the way of the lift bridge. Whichever kid pulled their bike wheels out first was chicken. Earl would tell me that he didn't know what was wrong with these doggone kids these days, but he replaced many front wheels over the years.
That would have been me. Side note.
Oh, man.
At Halloween, it was the wonderful and fine tradition for someone to torch a farmer's outhouse. Eventually, over the years, there were almost no outhouses left to set on fire. So on one Halloween, some boys actually built a full-size outhouse out of wood. Using their dad's pickup truck, they drove the splendidly constructed outhouse to the middle of Union Street, carefully lowering the darn thing from the truck bed and placing it on the street, and then they torched it on fire. dancing around it a few times, hooting and hollering. They then jumped back into the pickup truck and took off before the firemen and the police arrived.
Oh, man.
This important tradition lived on for at least one more year. This next segment is my later Spencerport Village memories. So around 1988, I purchased 53 Amity Street, which was originally built in 1883. It had a cistern in the basement. The cistern would hold water that came from the rain gutters. Using a hand water pump in the kitchen, it would bring the water up into the first floor kitchen sink. It was removed and replaced with indoor copper plumbing many years before I purchased the home. One day, a friend of the previous owners of this house paid me a friendly visit. Her name was Mary Bell Hawkins. I invited her in, and she told me some history of my home. She said that there were two spinster sisters who outlived their parents in this house. Their last names were the Turners. They did not believe in banks and hid money in between the first floor ceiling and the upstairs floor. After her visit with me, I went into the upstairs bedroom and pulled away the throw rug that came with the house. Under the rug, I found that there were two cuts in the floor about 2 feet from each other. This made it possible to lift this one board up, exposing the cavity between the floors. It was the place where money or expensive jewelry was hidden. I could see that it was well used, but guess what? Of course it was empty. Up until 1980, without exception, these elegant Victorian Turner sisters would always dress up, wearing their formal lacy blouses and long dresses, along with their jewelry and makeup. In their later years of life, they had a hard time going up and down the stairs. So one step at a time, they sat on their bottoms and went up and down the stairs in that fashion. Well, Mary Bell Hawkins also told me that these two sisters had a bank-style safe located between the kitchen and the dining room. Well, I could tell exactly where it was in the house because there were scratch marks on the floor where the safe would mark the floor when the door was open and closed. The size of the safe was about 2 feet by 2 feet and 2 feet deep. Well, when mowing the lawn, I came across the very corner of the safe sticking up out of the ground.
What?
I got a shovel and took to uncovering the treasure. It was made of heavy black metal with striping of gold trim. When I fully uncovered it, I first looked to my left and to my right to make sure that no neighbors were watching me. Well, I didn't want to report this newfound money as income where I would have to pay taxes on it. I carefully opened the door, and as it creaked open, I saw the inside was lined in concrete. Except for dirt, it was empty.
Man.
As told to me by Mary Bell Hawkins again, that starting in the late 1800s, Mr. Turner was the tavern proprietor. Tavern owners were needed for the mule team drivers, who were a rough and tumble lot. The mule team drivers would lead the mules down the mule path while the mules were hitched to the barges. If two barges with their mule teams met up with each other on the same side of the canal, one mule team would have to be unhitched from their barge. This was an added task which neither mule team driver wanted to do. So, to determine which team leader had to unhitch their ropes, they would first have a fist fight with each other.
Naturally.
After a long day, they headed to the closest tavern in town for some liquid dinner and food. So after working in his tavern, this Mr. Turner would sit on the back stoop of his house and drink from flat apothecary medicine bottles while contemplating life and the stars. Well, maybe he was also trying to figure out women, since there were 3 women in his house, his wife and his 2 daughters. He was the only male. Well, when he finished with the bottle, he threw it as far as he could in the backyard, wiping his face and turning around, went back into his house. From time to time, I would find these bottles while mowing the lawn. I donated 8 of them to the pharmacy in town to display them in their windows.
Old bottles are so cool.
They are.
Yeah.
Since this house was built before the Civil War started in 1861, it could have had a place to hide runaway slaves, but which was called the Underground Railway. Unless they were hidden in the cistern, there was no indication of hiding slaves that I could find, as far as I know. And also, as far as I know, there's no record that this occurred in my home. However, there was a portion of the basement used for this purpose in the home of Dr. Humphrey. That family lived just out of town. In 1982 and up through 1990, it took me 8 years to restore this 53 Amity Street home of mine. I used the hardware store in town owned by Mr. Helfridge, and at another time, Mr. John Leslow. He knew my house better than myself and would tell me what kind of plumbing, washers, or whatever I needed. I remember that he sold paint in the front of the store, and I would walk up to that hardware store from my house at least twice each Saturday. Picture this: in 1985, my breakfast room faced the narrow front yard. It was so close to the sidewalk that all summer long neighbors walking by would wave and holler hi to me. Once while eating breakfast, pancakes and sausages on my front porch, a 5K foot race passed me eating on my porch. When each runner went by, I waved to each one by raising my fork in the air still with a piece of sausage on it. The race probably was for part of the Spencerport Canal days. From 1985 to present, 2021, where the post office is now was B's Golden Needle, which was a tailor business. Over these years, around 1985, I went there several times for B to hem and tailor some of the clothes for me. I remember that she would hold 6 or so straight pins between her lips. Taking each pin from her closed lips one at a time, she would pin up the clothes she was working on. When it was time to take the pins out of the garment, she just threw the sharp metal pins onto the carpeted floor. Her rug was so full of straight pins, so much so that you could hardly see the color of the rug.
Oh, man.
You would be totally sure to wear shoes in her shop. Another business where the post office is now was an Italian restaurant. 2 sisters owned it and would always come over to your table to see how your meal was. They made all their own food, and it all tasted fantastic. There were only about 10 tables in this little restaurant, pleasantly arranged as I remember. Around 1990, the sisters moved the restaurant to the plaza located behind McDonald's. And then later on, they moved to Ridge Road. Around 1990, a fire took out a sports memorabilia and baseball trading card shop. Today, this area where the shop was is a walking path from Union Street to the side of the canal. There is a seating bench and flowers there. So anyway, on the next day after the fire, I remember seeing the owner sitting quietly on the curb. From all the wet debris, he was able to salvage a stack of cartons that contained new but totally wet trading cards. As kids walked by who had visited his shop from time to time, he gave them those cartons of sports trading cards. Also around 1990, for several years, the Feltners, who owned the insurance company in the village, would have a delightful open house at Christmas time. They would invite many of their neighbors from Amity Street and surrounding streets. Their home glowed with joy, friendship, and love. The children played Christmas songs and hymns while guests delighted in desserts arranged on the huge dining room table. Every guest walked around the table and filled their plates with tasty treats. Today, if you are walking around the village, you can see a few cement blocks along West Avenue. Well, back in the day, these blocks were used by people who needed to step out of their horse-drawn carriages. Actually, there is a black metal horse hitch next to one of them. I love Spencerport, and some of my memories are in my first book, Glenwater Chris, the Lighthouse Keeper. My wife and I have volunteered for several years in Christmas on the Canal. We still walk the village streets, and now with our puppy, and enjoy shopping in various businesses. Well, speaking of village businesses, my 3 novels can be purchased at the Unique Gift Shop. They also can be taken out in our Ogden Farmers Library. Besides in town, my novels can be purchased through Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all other book outlets worldwide. In fact, they have been sold in England and China. And I go to name the novels, although I mentioned it before: Glenwater Chris, the Lighthouse Keeper, Seaside Journeys of Faith, A Port James Romance, and soon to be released my 4th novel titled I Hear My Lighthouse Calling. My wife and I enjoy walking along the canal path, and we also can be seen paddling our 2-seater canoe in the canal. A few times we have talked to some boat owners that have taken their large vessels down the canal from Spencerport to the Albany area. From there, they have continued along, going south in the Hudson River, following it into New York Harbor. They have then traveled into the Atlantic Ocean and went along the coast all the way to Florida.
Wow.
So imagine that. Imagine from little Spencerport, they can travel by boat, uninterrupted, all the way to Florida.
Wow.
For my wife and I, Spencerport is a very, very special and beautiful village by the canal. Thank you so much for your time and for this opportunity.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful.
That was absolutely wonderful.
Well, thank you.
I have to offer my condolences on that giant Genesee art project.
I know.
that would be something to see.
But at least you know it was loved by all.
That's right.
Loved by all.
Plus, I got an A on the project.
There you go.
So.
That's what matters.
That stuck out to me when you had said that the tap dancer sounded like a diesel engine coming through. It's funny because whenever I think of ballerinas, tap dancers, I think of, it's very gentle. Dance is such a gentle art. But I'm just imagining somebody trying to get their hair cut. And,
right.
From all that.
Well, these are old buildings, and the whole darn building would shake.
Yeah,
yeah.
believe it.
Got 2 or 3 of them out there doing the tap dancing.
Yeah.
Well, that's part of why we wanted to start this series to begin with, is because, we could look at maps of old Spencerport, we can, look at manifests and things like that, but there's a certain perspective from people that lived here that you just don't get otherwise, and sharing all those things, it's almost iconic. The lighting of the outhouses on fire, the fire chief going from house to house to house. It's stuff like that that is just, those are the stories we want to preserve, because Spencerport and Ogden, it is a special place.
It truly is, and I was trying to think of things that, again, like you had touched on, would not be able to be found in a history book.
I think you nailed it.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, thank you.
Do you know the name of the restaurant that the Italian sisters had?
I scratched my head for that, and I
couldn't
remember. But like I said, it was in the location where the new post office is located now. Yeah.
Oh man.
Are you still on Amity Street?
Yeah. No, we're in Hickory Hollow.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Well, I was gonna say we should have to Go to Amity Street one of these days with a metal
I
detector.
know. Did you save the
Find out
safe?
what those sisters found.
Yeah,
You know,
really.
Maybe there's more treasures there.
That's so fun. That's so funny that they buried the safe
With nothing.
Yeah.
in
with
it.
concrete. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so bizarre. Did you save it?
I gave it to a neighbor.
Okay.
Hmm.
Yeah, it was probably pretty cool, but those things are heavy.
Yeah. Cement line.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Well,
That's
you know,
so funny.
these were just high quality, excellent stories. I think that speaks to both your caliber as a writer, but also your connection to this place as a Spencerport, as a native
Thank you.
Spencerportian.
Yeah.
Sure.
Is there any last words you'd like to say before we conclude our interview?
Just that I feel like wherever I lived, I always had my roots in Spencerport, and I'm proud of the town, and I'm also proud of this library. I think it's a fantastic library, and I thank you all for the work that you do every day here, for the community, for people that like to read, and for the community as a whole. So thank you both,
Oh, thank you.
Thank you for
Patrick
coming
and Caitlin.
Yeah.
in. Well, with that, let me go ahead